This is a Media Lab podcast. Dave, why are you carrying that lava lamp?
Because it's psychedelic, man. This is the good shit. Look at this thing.
The red tinted glasses. What are you dressed up as? What's going on?
Thank you for making fun of me. This is a beautiful little crop top that I picked up, and I think I look pretty swell in it.
First of all, I think the people at home should just, for a moment, stay with that image in their heads.
I've been working out. Kyle. Thanks for noticing.
All right. Well, I guess you can just plug the lamp into the machine here. In his own garage, Kyle has built a machine, cobbled together with parts found in his friend's church basement and a dumpster behind the local Dairy Queen. This monstrosity is now alive and evil. Kyle has convinced his friend Dave to help stop the apocalypse by reviewing films the machine picks. The ultimate purpose is still unknown, and Kyle could have probably done this himself, but he's not being dragged to hell alone. This is Kyle and Dave versus the machine. Welcome to Kyle and Dave versus the Machine. My name is Kyle.
I'm Dave. Still.
And I'm the machine.
A podcast where a sentient machine forces us to watch movies in order to prevent it from initiating the apocalypse, although we do tend to talk about the ideas of the movie rather than the movie itself. Today, we're going to be watching Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me.
Groovy.
Austin Powers.
Crazy baby, yeah!
Is back.
Yeah, baby, yeah!
With the help of the beautiful Felicity Shagwell.
How does that feel, baby?
Lower.
How does that feel, baby?
In a thrilling adventure of intrigue, treachery, and love. But Dr. Evil is back, and more evil than ever.
Gonna cry, huh? Yeah. I'm going to go back to the 60s and steal Austin Powers' mojo. Ladies and gentlemen.
All right, Dave, I am very interested in knowing the... Oh, Dave, we have a knock on the guest door.
Oh man, that door's been pretty busy lately. I think you need to check that out. It's just floating there.
All right.
Hey there.
Oh.
Hi, Lucia from
Hi.
Repodcasting. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing very good. You know, do you this is a weird coincidence. Do you have time to possibly watch and talk about Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me?
Oh my gosh. I always have time for Austin Powers.
Oh, excellent. You know, before we jump too far into this, and before we get Dave to talk at all, why don't you talk about your history with Austin Powers and then specifically this sequel?
Well, I've seen all three films many times, probably more than I should admit. And The Spy Who Shagged Me was the first one that I watched in theaters. I loved it at the time. There were definitely parts of it that I was either uncomfortable with or disliked, but overall I really liked it. Yeah, I owned all three on DVD and I watched them a lot.
That is digital video disc for the younger viewers.
I'm just curious too, because we actually have a bit of a shared history then with this film franchise. What was this, like a family outing film, or you were pursuing this by yourself?
No, my parents, their English isn't that strong, so I never went to the movies with them except for like a couple times when I was very little. This was something that I took a friend to see on her birthday.
That's nice.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's really nice.
You don't have to share this if you don't want to, but can you share like about how old you were in 1999?
I was 18 when this came out.
Okay. So Dave, I want to know the same kind of answer from you. What's your history with Austin Powers and then this movie in particular?
Sure. My parents never went to the movies with me because they didn't love... Austin Powers...
That's so sad.
No, we get along great.
Austin Powers was my father.
Are we doing? We already did Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, Kyle. I think we need to move past that. Austin Powers. So when the first one came out, I saw it in theaters. I'm a little bit older. The second one came out, I saw it in theaters. Third one, I'm pretty sure I saw it in theaters. I think like we talked about with Star Wars, Austin Powers became this like pretty, I hesitate to use such a strong phrase, but cultural thing for comedy. It kind of, fucking blew up. And so this is something that was, even now I'm like, have this hazy quotable moments from the franchise.
I would almost posit that it is
if you were watching any type of television or plugged into any type of media, I don't think it would be possible to have no knowledge at all of what Austin Powers was. Like, he was in commercials. He was like he was everywhere.
Like in that era, yes.
In that era,
yeah. I don't think people today give a shit. But
I actually have a counterpoint to that, but we'll talk about that later.
It's almost like you have already watched it and done some research.
Yeah, it's weird. I know we haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, we don't want to.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, how could we have watched it when we were just sitting in front of the machine here, the three of us, to watch it together, Kyle?
So my history is very similar in that the first film. So I guess let me back up. My parents did rent a ton of movies for us kids to watch. We always had like family nights. And I've talked about my woes of how the local theater burnt down in my small little town for a good chunk of my teenagehood. The original film, Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery, was definitely a rental that my parents brought home that we all watched together. And
how old were you when that happened? Because that could have been very awkward.
I would have been 13.
Okay.
13, 14, somewhere in that ballpark. Probably still not necessarily super appropriate, but I mean, you're a teenager. It's not like you don't know all this stuff from going to school. This movie is the movie I went and had my parents take me to for my 16th birthday.
Well, that's so cute.
In Red Deer, Alberta, because we still didn't have our theater built. We drove into Red Deer. We had like a dinner together, and then they took me to the theater, and this is what we watched. So out of all the possibilities to go and see in the theater, I picked the Austin Powers movie to go and see.
I'm imagining you.
I think it's a great
I'm imagining you in a tux with a bow tie. It's adorable.
That's right. Now, the third film is interesting. So it came out when I was in university, and I took this interesting opportunity to be a camp counselor in Massachusetts for 2 summers in a row, and I was there for 2 months each time. And so the people that came were extremely wealthy families. Like, we are talking top 1% of families of New York City who sent their children away for 2 months at a time. And so one of the kids' fathers was a producer on this movie, and so we got to see it a month early before anyone else got to. And I actually got, I had a shirt with Gold member on it that they gave to everyone that night that we got to go and see it. Anyway, so it's a weird history I have with Austin Powers.
Wow.
Wait, so can I ask you something? Because I'm pretty sure I saw the last one in theaters as well, but I don't even recall because I didn't really like it.
No,
and
it's
so
not
it's
good.
just not that memorable. Okay, so I was going to ask if, because you got to see it a month early and in these special circumstances, did you maybe enjoy it more?
Well, I think Austin Powers has moments of brilliance, and I think that's what everyone remembers. But so the third one is not good. Although I enjoyed like the references to some musical theater things that they reference in that movie, and I have always appreciated the openings to Austin Powers movies because I just think they're clever and interesting how they use titles and stuff like that. But yeah, no, it's not great.
Okay.
Why don't we take the time to go and watch this movie? And I'll, of course, thank some sponsors in the meantime. And then when we return, we'll be discussing Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me.
Hey everyone, Kyle here, ready to talk to you about some of our lovely sponsors here this week. Yeah, baby. That's what he says. That is what Mr. Powers says. First and foremost, Kyle and Dave vs. the Machine is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network powered by ATB. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This episode of Kyle and Dave vs. the Machine is brought to you by Storylines, a podcast from Women in Film and Television Alberta. Storylines highlights some of our province's most successful women in film and television, both behind the camera and in front of it. Host Sheena Rossiter is herself a filmmaker, and she has had some deep and instructive conversations with trailblazers and experts in the field. Her most recent episode that you might find interesting is her conversation with Tasha Hubbard. It's entitled Telling Indigenous Stories. Here's a bit of the description. We hear from award-winning Cree filmmaker Tasha Hubbard. She speaks with Storylines host Sheena Rossiter about how she got into documentary film, the importance of telling Indigenous stories, and the success of her most recent film, We Will Stand Up. You can find Storylines on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can find it at wifta.ca. That's WIFTA.ca. This week, we're also brought to you by Pod Power. With Pod Power, ATB is making it possible for us to amplify the voices of Albertans and Alberta podcasters. This week, we're giving a Pod Power shout out to A Tale of Two Weeklies. A Tale of Two Weeklies is a documentary podcast series that digs into the rise and fall of Edmonton's C magazine and View Weekly, two alt-weeklies engaged in a newspaper war that neither survived. You can find A Tale of Two Weeklies wherever pods are cast, or visit taleoftwoweeklies.com.
All right. Well, there we go. That was a comedy. You said, Lucia, that you've seen this, multiple times. When was the last time you probably sat down and watched Austin Powers?
It's probably been like a good 5 to 7 years. Like, it's been a while.
How about you, Dave? When was probably the last time you recall sitting down and watching any of the Austin Powers films?
I don't know, 1999? I don't have a recollection of owning this, and I was already I was definitely not a Beyonce fan, so I didn't like the third one, so I wouldn't have owned it. I think we went to go see it because Helen's a big fan. To be honest, definitely after the third one, I don't think I've watched any of them. So what's the third one, 2002?
I think, so roughly.
It's been 18 years.
Before we jump into some of the backstory, though, how are we feeling? Yeah, like thumbs up, thumbs down, in the middle?
I fell asleep.
I'm in the middle.
I fell asleep 3 times.
You fell asleep. I think that tells a lot about what to expect. I'm kind of in the middle too, but I'm excited to jump into talking about the movie. But before we do that, let's go through some of the backstory here. So, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, was released on June 11th, 1999. The other major-ish release was the Canadian film The Red Violin, written by Don McKellar and Francois Girard.
Hold up.
Directed. What's that?
How do we not watch The Red Violin and we watched Austin Powers? What is wrong with your machine?
I guess the machine is very diligent in trying to find culturally relevant films, because nobody outside of you and me probably remember The Red Violin.
I love
your
The Red
machine's
Violin.
cooked, buddy. God damn it. Okay,
so that movie was directed by Francois Girard, starring Jason Fleming, Greta Scacchi, and Don McKellar. Austin Powers, Spy Who Shagged Me, is rated 6.6 on IMDb. It has a 59 on Metacritic. On Rotten Tomatoes, from 87 critics, it averages 52%. So that's a rotten film then in that case. And then for 942,000 users, it's a 71%
oh my
on
God.
Rotten Tomatoes. So it is available on DVD or Blu-ray. You can buy or rent it on iTunes. You can also rent via YouTube or Google Play Movies. So fairly available. Its budget in 1999 was $33 million. It opened to $17 million. Domestically, it would go on to make 206. Internationally, it would have another 105. So its grand total was $312 million, which adjusted for inflation is $483 million. It was the 10th highest grossing movie of 1999, so it made a lot of money. Its plot description from IMDb is, Dr. Evil is back and has invented a new time machine that allows him to go back to the 1960s and steal Austin Powers' mojo, inadvertently leaving him shagless. That is the official plot description for this movie. All right, so it stars Mike Myers as Austin Powers / Dr. Evil / Fat Bastard. There's also Heather Graham as Felicity Shagwell, Seth Green as Scott Evil, and Vern Troyer as Mini-Me. So let's start with Vern Troyer. He was born January 1st, 1969. Vern Troyer had an extensive acting career. His first film appearance was in the 1996 film called Pinocchio's Revenge. It was a horror film, and he starred in it as Pinocchio. Wow. He would go on to be in some pretty high-grossing films, such as Jingle All the Way, Men in Black, and Mighty Joe Young, as well as appearing briefly in the film Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I have to ask, do either of you remember Vern Troyer from any of his previous appearances, or was this kind of your first memory of him being in a movie?
It's my first and only memory of him. Even like hearing you say many movies I've seen that he was in, I don't recall.
I think it was under like heavy makeup.
Yeah. Well, in Fear and Loathing. He's in Fear and Loathing.
I think it's literally one scene like in the background. So they needed a small person to be part of that. So definitely, though, his appearance as Mini-Me in Austin Powers would catapult him into the cultural zeitgeist. Now, to talk about the elephant in the room, he has a genetic reality of cartilage hair hypoplasia, the results of which include dwarfism, varying levels of immunodeficiency, and a predisposition to cancer. As such, to make it in Hollywood seems like this huge long shot, but he continued working for a couple of decades. So other high-profile roles were How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Bubble Boy, the cult film Pauly Shore is Dead, before transitioning into many television appearances. Unfortunately, his life had a tragic ending. Battling with alcoholism for years, on April 21st, 2018, Troyer would pass away at the age of 49. It would later be ruled as a suicide due to alcohol poisoning. His last movie came out posthumously. It was called Aliens, Clowns, and Geeks, and was released in 2019. However, an unreleased movie called the 420 movie, Mary and Jane, seems to be on the horizon. Any of you seen Aliens, Clowns, and Geeks at all?
Is there a way to use words to describe the face I'm making? Or
Yeah, you look like Grimace from the McDonald's commercials.
Yeah, Grimace is a good one.
Seth Green. Maybe a bit of a cop-out here, but he was born February 8th, 1974. We've already heard about Seth Green. So if you want a rundown of his entire resume to this point, you can go and check out our episode on Idle Hands. No. But don't watch Idle Hands. It's awful.
Don't watch that movie.
It's so bad.
It's so bad.
Just know that Seth's career at this point was just taking off. So he was becoming pretty big at this point.
Let's just stress again, do not watch Idle Hands. It is so bad.
Yeah, it is among the worst movies I've ever seen. But okay.
So bad.
Dave, the machine wants you to continue over here for me. So I'm going to send you this here and you can continue on.
Heather Graham. Heather Graham was born January 29th, 1970. She started acting as a teenager. She had a couple of uncredited roles to begin her career. First in the movie Mrs. Soffel?
I don't know. Never heard of it, so I'm going to say Soffel.
Mrs. Saffel from 1984. And then she portrayed Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito's mother in the movie Twins during a flashback. But it was her roles in Drugstore Cowboy and then the role of Annie Blackburn in the TV series Twin Peaks that would really push her into the limelight. The machine. You're going double butt, machine.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, it's fine.
I mean, I'm not sorry. It's the machine's fault.
Yeah, it's just a machine.
Listen, I had a really long night last night.
It's not like a person wrote this who could have reread it. But it was probably the films Swingers and Boogie Nights that really had her breakthrough. After that, she had a cameo in Scream 2, starred in Lost in Space. I actually like that movie. I know that upsets you. And then appeared in this Austin Powers film.
I just want to break in, like, for me, and I don't know, Lucy, if you have a different perspective, it felt like Heather Graham kind of just, like, was in everything all at once. Like, it seemed like she was just like, oh, she's in, like, 5 movies
and then
in the span of 2 years, and then has basically dropped off pretty quickly.
Well, I haven't seen her in anything super recently, but I feel like she had, like, a good stretch there. But yeah, she was in a lot of things at once.
Speaking to that, since this peak, she has continued to work. Like, I didn't know that because I'm an asshole. Some of her highlights include Bowfinger, Hope Springs, 9 episodes of Scrubs, and The Hangover. Over the last 5 years, she's stuck mostly to television. She has 3 films she has 3 films and a television pilot that are all in post-production. Spelling error. But her next project you might be able to see is Wander. Its plot description is, after getting hired to probe a suspicious death in the small town of Wander, a mentally unstable private investigator becomes convinced the case is linked to the same conspiracy cover-up that caused the death of his daughter.
It stars Tommy Lee Jones, so that's the kind of tone you're going to expect from that movie.
He's like, he's pretty old now.
I don't disagree. I'm just saying who it stars.
Oh my God, this thing just goes on and on. Mike Myers. Mike Myers was like, it's my man Mike for a little bit, and then not anymore. Born May 25th, 1963. He's Canadian, if you couldn't tell. Sorry,
I mean,
Kyle.
his accent is pretty thick. Like, he speaks like a Canadian.
Okay, let me try that. Okay. He also started acting as a teenager. His first credit is on the Canadian television series King of Kensington, clearly from Toronto. He was also on the Canadian show The Littlest Hobo for one episode. It was a cute dog.
But does anyone have any relationship with that show, The Littlest Hobo?
Of course.
I remember hating it, but I saw like so many different episodes growing up.
I agree. It was like the boring show, but I watched it anyway. We didn't have a lot of options.
I had 2 other channels.
What's boring about a dog walking around? I'm
the cat person.
But depending on your age, the breakthrough role for Mike Myers is when he was cast on Saturday Night Live in 1989. That was like a golden era of SNL. There, he would have such recurring characters as Wayne, Dieter, Simon, and Lina Richmond of Copy Talk. He would take his Wayne character. Wasn't there a last name? Were we just going to say Wayne? I don't remember. Campbell,
thank you. Yeah.
He would take his Wayne Campbell character along with Dana Carvey's Garth character. I'm pretty sure there's a last name there too, but that's fine. Machine. And be in the film Wayne's World and Wayne's World 2. Fun fact, the performance of Bohemian Rhapsody at the beginning of Wayne's World is credited as repopularizing that song.
Apparently it was.
It went back to number 1 25 years later.
It's a great song. Although apparently divisive in that opinion. Some people don't like it.
Those people are wrong.
Yeah, because they're horrible human beings and have no taste. He'd be in the film that has slowly grown to being considered a minor classic.
Yeah, I think that again, tense is wrong.
Sorry.
Maybe someone should have done the second pass before sending this off.
You know what? That might have been my responsibility.
Just shut up and read.
Anyways, what was that movie that's called a minor classic?
Yeah, I'm working on it. Hold on. He'd be in the film. He'd be in the film that has slowly become considered a minor classic. So I Married an Axe Murderer. But then he'd co-write and star in Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery, which blew up, spawned 2 sequels, and was rumored to be an animated show on HBO before that project fell through.
Like, not that this is what this episode is going to be about, but it's a pretty interesting story about how, yes, it was supposed to become an animated show on HBO, and then eventually that fell through. This was like a multi-year story and thing that happened.
I didn't even know about that. That's interesting. Yeah. But HBO is outside of my wheelhouse anyway, so can't afford it, so couldn't even afford the news on it. The other franchise he'd be a part of, and probably even more culturally relevant, is the animated film Shrek, where he voices the titular role. Titular? That's right? Yeah.
Yeah, you got
it. He came in late to that project after the tragic death of Chris Farley. And for good or for bad, Shrek would spawn countless memes and make Smash Mouth All-Star live in infamy. You don't like Shrek? Wow.
I like Shrek just fine.
It's fine.
It's fine.
Some bias in his writing. This machine. And this is why we couldn't watch The Red Violin. Shrek would be a bit of a cash cow. It'd have 3 sequels, a bunch of television specials, and video games. After the disastrous reception, both critically and commercially, of his film The Love Guru in 2008, Mike Myers sort of retired. He'd still voice Shrek in different projects, and taking the very occasional bit part in films like Inglourious Basterds and Bohemian Rhapsody. He'd also produce and direct the documentary Supermensch about the life of Shep Gordon, a music producer.
That documentary was on Netflix for a while, but I don't think it is anymore. It's actually pretty good. It's a pretty great documentary.
He seems like he's attracted to playing characters under heavy makeup where people might not even know him. Obviously, it was being toyed with in the Austin Powers movies, but it reached its extreme during the revival of The Gong Show in 2017, where he was the host Tommy Maitland, a supposed older English presenter with a fake backstory called Tommy Maitland. What?
So, if you don't know about this is so wild. Do you know what The Gong Show is, either of you?
Yes, originally. Yeah. Okay. I didn't know they remade it.
So there's the original Gong Show like in the 70s, right? Bad axe, banged the gong. It came back in 2017, but hosted by this guy named Tommy Maitland. But it was like, Tommy Maitland was the only name in the show. That's who they said was starring in it. They had this fake backstory, but it was actually Mike Myers under makeup.
Oh, weird.
The whole time. And he never said that. He never did interviews out of character. He would always be in the character of Tommy Maitland. So he went what's his name? The Man on the Moon guy, Andy Kaufman. He went full Andy Kaufman, committed to this role to the degree. I only caught a very brief one episode of this at my parents' house. I'm like, oh, do you know that's Mike Myers? And they would not believe me. They would not believe me that there was Mike Myers underneath makeup.
Oh, see, to me, maybe didn't look like him, but to me, it was kind of obvious.
I know, me too, but apparently it really convinced people.
Fooled a lot of people.
I think I'd already given up on cable by then, so I had no idea. Sorry. The Gong Show came back in 2017. It was named American Idol. But never on the show is Mike Myers credited as portraying him. An untitled Mike Myers Netflix television series project is on the horizon, as is rumored an Austin Powers 4. Oh, God.
Well, Austin Powers 4 has been rumored for 12
Yeah, so long.
This movie was written by Mike Myers and Michael McCullers. We've heard about Mike Myers, but I don't know if you need that. We've already heard about Mike Myers. Michael McCullers was a Saturday Night Live writer for one season before being hired by Mike Myers to help out on the Austin Powers sequel. He'd also helped co-write the third Austin Powers film. He'd go on to write the Tina Fey and Amy Poehler film Baby Mama, which he also directed. Another credit is the animated film The Boss Baby. Coming up, it looks like his collaboration with Mike Myers continues, as there is an untitled Shrek reboot that is currently being written to be released in 2022. He was also announced to be the writer for the fifth try at making a good Fantastic Four movie.
Mm-hmm. Like we needed another one.
Yikes.
Have there really been 4 versions?
Correct. So there was one that they made in the 80s, which was that never came out officially. It was just so the studio could retain the copyright. There was the 2 that came out in the 90s that are bad. And then the last one that came out a few years ago, which was also bad. So this will be the 5th time they've tried to do a Fantastic Four movie.
Directed by Jay Roach, born June 14th, 1957. His first directing job was a film called Zoo Radio, which came out in 1990. But that didn't do very well, so he didn't make another film until Mike Myers took a chance and hired him to direct the first Austin Powers movie in 1997. He'd direct the next 2 Austin Powers movies, and then Mystery Alaska, Meet the Parents, and the very bad Dinner for Schmucks. Wow. It's a strong opinion this robot has.
I'm sorry.
I'm not saying it was a good movie, but the
very harsh. This machine is very harsh in their opinion of films.
But then Jay Roach would have a mid-career change, sort of like Adam McKay, who began directing things like Anchorman and Step Brothers, and now makes important movies such as The Big Short and Vice. So Jay Roach in the last few years has made films like Trumbo, a biopic about blacklisted screenwriter Dalton Trumbo, and Bombshell, the story about Roger Ailes? Roger Ailes and Fox News. He's also started being a producer for other people's films, but there are no directing projects that have been announced. Kyle, this has to be the longest fucking preamble we've ever done.
Hey, we had to get into the nitty gritty of Mike Myers.
Holy
okay,
shit.
He's a very important Canadian hero.
I'm actually sweating.
So that's some backstory. Lucia, I want you to tell me, what is your opinion, having now just watched this movie? Yeah, in present day, in 2020, what is your impression of this second Austin Powers movie?
I mean, I still... How can I put this? I begrudgingly enjoy it.
No, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. I see that it has problems and there are parts I don't like about it. I see that it's not very culturally sensitive to certain groups of people. So, I don't condone that, of course. But I think because I've been watching this movie since I was 18 and I've seen it many times, it's just kind of ingrained in me. It's hard not to love it.
How about you, Dave?
I kept falling asleep. I thought it was awful. I think there are moments where I laugh, but am I laughing with it or at it? That's a tough question. And not to single her out, but I've never been a very big Heather Graham fan. And, of course, she's the gorgeous pinup model look, but when I was watching this, I realized the thing that bothered me the most about her, which is not something that should bother me actually, is that she's not an actress. She's actually it looks like a naive, fun-loving girl who's just happy to be on set. It felt like the whole movie she's breaking because she's just enjoying it, but it doesn't play with this character of a spy. There's just something that I can't keep up with, and I felt like it kept falling flat for me.
That's interesting, because I feel like that's kind of true for everyone in this movie. Like, it feels like they just got together and like, we're having fun. Let's make a movie. Roll the camera. Let's just improv for this scene for like 20 minutes and we'll cut out the 4 best minutes of it.
But that's the thing with like professional, well, I mean, with comedians and, like everything from Will Ferrell to Seth Green, like all those little moments where even if they're improv, there's a comedic energy, sort of a self-awareness of how stupid they're being on the screen. Whereas Heather Graham, for me, just kept getting caught in it. Like in the first movie, not that I watched it in the lead up and also felt asleep like 2 or 3 times and didn't really enjoy it. Elizabeth Hurley, who's also, a pinup model, but she's got a look like she's very self-aware of what she's doing there. And she seems, I don't know, it sounds bad, more intelligent and more intelligible in that role of the femme fatale. And Heather Graham was like kind of like too sweet. That's such a crappy criticism that I couldn't buy into it at all.
I have to disagree. I really like Heather Graham though, so probably I'm biased. But I think that because she was playing it like she's from the 60s, so she's supposed to be like Austin Powers' contemporary. And Austin Powers is very silly and like naive. And I feel like she actually fit it really well.
Because this is so steeped in like James Bond lore, this is so straight out of Roger Moore era Bond girls, Bond himself, like just silly, ridiculous stuff. Like I've always taken that to be what Austin Powers is mostly concerned with doing. Here is my bold criticism, and I don't know if either of you are going to agree with me. I actually think there is some legitimately great, funny moments in this movie, but none of them involve Austin Powers. Yeah. I actually think everybody else are, like, I think the Dr. Evil subplot thing, like, I literally could have just stayed with that without ever having Austin Powers come into it. Yes. And I've been, like, totally fine. And that's so weird about, like, the title role and the title character. This is also probably saying more about me. I also very much dislike the Roger Moore Bond films too. So even though I like camp and other things, I've never enjoyed that type. I don't know. It's a weird balancing act for me for it to actually work. And so because it reminds me so much of Roger Moore, I'm just like, nah, I don't care.
I think Austin Powers is like camp exponential.
Yeah.
Like it's just too much. He's too much for me too. I actually don't disagree with what you just said.
I'll go stronger. I think it's awful. Yeah. It's disgusting to look at. His the shtick of him being this thing, like it plays for the first scene of both movies that women want to lie down with him, and by the end it's almost disgusting. I can't handle it anymore. But I grew up in an era where James Bond was Roger Moore, and I think that's why I liked it to start. And now that we have super hot and dark Daniel Craig, I can't go back, Kyle. Like, you need to have muscles and a will to kill people, right? This thing about
I guess
floating in space on a raking moon. It's just.
I mean, I want to bring up that point a little bit later because I think that there is a very interesting comparison we can make between how the James Bond franchise has evolved versus how and what the role of the Austin Powers is inside of that. But before we do that, Dave, you're going to be familiar with this over the last few weeks, but I've written some notes while I was watching the movie. So to better structure this, there's, of course, the Star Wars crawl that opens up this sequel. And I don't know why I never put it together before, but it's like, oh, this is obviously because Star Wars Episode 1 literally came out 2 weeks before this movie came out.
Sorry, Kyle. Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
The Phantom Menace. Sorry, the full title, yes. So that's literally the only reason why the Star Wars crawl is there in the first place. I want to talk about some of the most egregious thing. By the way, I should just point out, just so people are not like surprised at the end, I'm like with Lucy, I'm kind of middle of the road with this movie. There's things like I just dislike about it strongly, and then there's these moments I'm like, I'm actually having a good time with it. But what I was struck by this time rewatching it, I did not remember all the product placement that happens in this movie, and like the egregious product placement. I will tell you this, I would have not have known what Starbucks was at 16 years old because there was not a Starbucks here.
Sorry.
Like at all. So I did not know what Starbucks was. Now I'm like, oh, that's weird. Why are they in a Starbucks headquarters and like drinking Starbucks? And what was the other thing? There's like 3 other things. There's a beer, a Heineken, I think they talk about, and
Coke.
There's something else. There's like they constantly were talking about. I'm like, boy, how much money did they get for talking about all this stuff?
Well, in Wayne's World, they do that but they do it
It's
so
much funnier.
cleverly.
Right.
Yeah, that it's like, it's worth it. But in this one, yeah, it's just not funny. It's clearly just
I think
for cash.
Yeah.
the Starbucks reference, and I'm sorry to pull the Toronto thing on you, Kyle. We did have operating movie theaters growing. No, I think.
Well, you also grew up in a town that had like over 1 million people. I grew up in like a town of 6,000, so it's like
more than 2 million. So I think 2 million people. So I think that not that anyone's counting, but Starbucks had already become the evil conglomerate that had destroyed local coffee culture. And this is pre what they call third generation, like in Calgary, awesome coffee. You know, this is before people were building these incredible shops and learning how to do these historic brewing methods. So I think it played really well in '99 that the correlation of evil was this galactic empire out of Seattle that had infected everything. It was challenging Tim Hortons, Kyle. Like, people were upset. You don't fuck with Timmy's, man. So
they're not Canadian anyways. Who cares?
well, they used to be. Now they're just well, everything's gone downhill.
I think it was around that time that there was one intersection in Toronto that literally had a Starbucks on 3 of the
It's
corners.
still kind of like
Probably.
that. Actually, now that's Tim Hortons.
I think one of them has changed.
Now,
Yeah.
now it's Tim
Oh.
Hortons. There's
And that was the plot of You've Got Mail. So there you go. So another big thing here. So there, of course, Jerry Springer plays this huge part at kind of the beginning of the movie. Very 90s reference. I knew who Jerry Springer was, but had never watched that show. And my parents would not have let me watch that show. That would have been a bit too much. The first time I got exposed to Jerry Springer was when I went to university and would watch it late at night sometimes and be like, I can't believe these people are real. And it turns out they weren't. It was mostly made up, but still. Yeah. Does anyone have any experience with Jerry Springer other than the obvious joke that it's Jerry Springer?
Yeah, I was on it.
You were on it. Okay, great. Which episode?
I was in university-ish. Well, I was already failed out, but
Yeah, you were on the university campus.
I spent a lot of time watching Jerry, and I was actually just talking about this with Helen. Oprah Winfrey started off with a show that was kind of like first generation Jerry Springer before it was Nazis.
Yeah.
It was like almost shock TV before she became. It's kind of creeps me out a little bit that Oprah ended up here and Jerry ended up. I mean, depends who you talk to, either down here or up here, because they're both still culturally remembered. It frightens me, Kyle, that that's a barometer of American culture.
I mean, that was such a 90s thing, though. Like, that's going to be the next thing I
They
bring
still
up.
have it.
Like,
Maury's still out there. You are not the father, right? I mean, that's still a thing.
and that still
We have
lingers memes and
judge
stuff about it.
shows, right? I mean, how many? It's all the same culture,
But I
right?
think it is. But I guess my argument here would be that as much as you're right, like those shows still exist, they're still on. But there was a time, definitely during the late 90s, where shock TV was the thing to be. Like, it was like, that is what was driving the most ratings. Different like sports organizations. And I mean, I'm a wrestling fan, so they were definitely leaning on it in there too. It was like, all we have to do is shock them and be provocative and not have anything else really to offer, but be shocking and provocative. And that's to an extent still around, but not to the same degree. I think things have become a little bit more PG actually in recent years.
But I would argue that that's what led to reality TV, you know, because that's kind of the point of reality TV too, is like, can you believe these people are real?
Right. Yeah. Like your Bachelors and all Fire Island and all the other stuff that's out there
Kim
nowadays.
Kardashian, but I might argue along the same lines that it's not that shock TV left; it's that everything is now based on shock TV. That the volume's changed, and now you
Yeah, I can see
can't
that.
watch. Like, one of the things that struck me watching this is comedy, as disgusting as this movie could be, was still purer then. Like, you can't really watch a comedy just to laugh anymore. I mean, everything now has to have this raw edge and shock value. It's
Yeah. No, I can see that.
getting a little
I
frustrating.
mean, that is actually a big point that I was noticing. And maybe both of you have other examples that you can think of, or I'm just not looking in the right spots. But I feel, this is a feeling, not a reality, I feel that the quote unquote comedy film doesn't really get made anymore. Yes, there's comedies that are made, but there's not like disappear. We're straight up, like start to finish, just a wacky comedy meant to make you laugh. Those types of movies I don't think get made all that much anymore. And if they are, it's like they're not getting a theater release. Those are going like to Netflix, maybe to die, to that no one's going to watch them.
Yeah. I think that you've still got like Adam Sandler doing his prep.
I like it.
But,
you want to talk about nostalgia? I love all this
Oh,
Netflix
boy.
stuff. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, when was the last time that there was just like a wacky comedy that went to a theater and did well?
Yeah, like I can't even think of the last one that would, like, this was the 10th highest grossing movie of the year. I can't even remember, like, the Hangover was a comedy ostensibly, but even that is not the traditional comedy either.
I think it started to fade when Will Ferrell moved to the internet. You know?
Oh,
'cause-
Funny or Die.
Yeah, because I think, I mean, he's had a few bombs too, but those are of the same vein, just so stupid but hilarious. And then there's something about that generation, you know, once, like I thought that Kristen Wiig would come out and just blow out. And so like maybe you could argue Bridesmaids, and then everything on that level flatline. But there might be also a correlation both with the internet and, you know, what is now termed PC culture. It's hard to get away with stupid comedy anymore because everybody's angry all the time at something. So, you know, you can't release Austin Powers right now. Like, it never.
No,
Yeah, never
I
mind.
agree.
That. Yeah,
because number one, the two biggest examples. Number one, I also rewatched the first Austin Powers just to familiarize myself with, like, what happened in the first one. Will Ferrell straight up does brownface in the first movie.
I wrote that down.
Yeah, and it's less so in this movie, but still, like I felt very uncomfortable watching. I'm like, oh, this is not good.
pre 9/11, it was fair game.
I kept going back and forth because there was certain jokes that I really don't feel like the point of the joke was to make fun of gay people, and then there was later jokes like, oh no, this is a joke because they're gay, and like, that feels so dated. I mean, it would have felt a bit dated then, I think, but definitely so now. So it's like, oh boy, like, you can definitely see the age of this film when you watch it back, which is unfortunate.
Since we're talking about Will Ferrell and brownface, did you know that this one, not won, but was nominated for an Oscar for Best
Which
Makeup?
Correct.
This
Yes.
movie? Because of
Yes.
Fat Bastard?
Probably,
yes.
yes.
Fat Bastard.
I mean, yeah, this is like the Eddie Murphy movie Norbit, not only being nominated but winning an Oscar for Best Makeup, and it's just like,
Oh my God, Norbit
it
won?
did. That was the joke that year because technically Norbit won an Oscar before Martin Scorsese ever won one, and it's like, oh, that's hard to stomach. But
Actually, that's a good point on the Sign of the Times. Eddie Murphy made, what was the big franchise he had? All fat suits.
oh, Nutty Professor.
Nutty Professor. And this is the same era that was, you know, that's just how you do it. That's how you make big comedy hits, is you show your comedic range by being to play different characters, and then you make fun of fat, short, gay, different colors,
all
women,
all the big hits. Because that's honestly really all the thing that Fat Bastard is there for, is to make fun of that he is a fat person, which is like kind of awful in and of itself. I also wrote down that Fat Bastard in and of itself is such a 90s creation. Like, this is straight up like, oh, we're gonna make a South Park character be in a live action movie. Like, that's all that character exists to be. And so it's like, once his like one note joke kind of goes out, it's like, yeah, okay, we get it.
It's maybe reflective a little bit of the SNL sketch comedy mentality brought to a feature film. You know, like, if you had him walk out for 10 minutes in a fat suit that plays one way, it's not necessarily better in its intent. I think Austin Powers is the same thing. Like, if he was a recurring character on Saturday Night Live, like many of, like Wayne Campbell, there's something hilarious. If you don't know if he's going to show up and then he does some stupid shit, you're like, oh yeah, that's pretty funny. But to sit there for an hour and a half.
Yeah,
oh my God.
I think that's the biggest thing. Like, this is usually the big criticism people have about Saturday Night Live characters getting their own movie, which is like, there's not enough plot to last an hour and a half. And I know that Austin Powers was not a Saturday Night Live creation, but it feels that way. I like the actual plot of this movie. I should have tried to count it at the very beginning. I think might be 20 minutes. Like, basically, is like how much plot is in there, stretched out. But that being said, I say that, and yet I loved every Dr. Evil sequence. I just enjoyed.
But they were separate
all
from
of
the
those
plot.
things. They are. I know that has nothing to do with what is going on in the movie whatsoever.
But it knows that in a way, like it tells you, Basil says, like, don't think about this too much.
Right.
And that goes for you too, audience.
Broke the fourth wall. That was pretty funny. Yeah. Because I was already upset by the point he said that. It was like 10 minutes in. And I was like, none of this makes sense. And then Baz was like, it's not supposed to make sense. You're like, all right, fine. I'll give you another 10 minutes.
I can accept that because this is actually sometimes what bogs down time travel movies where they have to like, let's explain this in like, we're going to try and explain this plot mechanic for 10 minutes. Like, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It's like you're doing time travel. I'm going to say one of my favorite jokes that is so niche, which is when they're up on the space station. He's mentioning about all the different units that are around. There's like, we have Moon Unit Alpha and they do something. And then we have Moon Unit Zappa. Do you get the joke there at all?
Yeah, that's Frank Zappa's daughter's name.
Frank Zappa's daughter is called Moon Unit, which I thought was really fun. And I just like there was like a very side. And I would not have understood that at the time. Straight up, would not have known that. But now that I do, it's like, oh, that's funny that most people probably don't know why that's a funny joke.
And then he makes the exact same joke 2 seconds later with the Alan Parsons
Project. Yeah. I also like the kind of allusion to Charlie Chaplin with the globe bit, because that's straight out of The Great Dictator. And him playing around with the thing and hitting number 2 right in the face. By the way, a little bit of a plot inconsistency because number 2 is killed off in the first movie, and then this kind of comes back here with no explanation.
Well, so does is it Mustafa? I mean,
correct. Yeah, he's supposedly.
I know they time travel,
they went back
but he has the elongated death sequences, which are actually so Will Ferrell and hilarious. But he dies in both. Like this, this time travel. The best part, the only thing that made the ball in the face thing was that Rob Lowe, his sudden crying was fucking genius. It was incredible. The break, he's so good. I laughed there.
I have to say, Rob Lowe was like genius casting for a
really
young
good.
Robert Wagner.
Some things that I found out though. Did you know that Rob Lowe used to date one of Robert Wagner's daughters?
I did.
So I think so he got to play
Robert
his
Wagner's
ex-girlfriend's dad.
Controversy where
he knew him well. He could
murdered his wife, right? So
what?
Is that
Robert Wagner?
What's her name? Natalie Wood, is it? They were married. The second marriage, she disappeared on an island, and he is the one that allegedly had a fight with her on a boat, and she never came back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of
conspiracy theories.
Not everyone knows conspiracy theories about what happened, so no one, I don't think, really knows. But I'm sure HBO will make like a 10-part series about it so that we can watch one day. I mean, we've been talking about it here a lot. Let's do a quick run of this. Maybe like if you can think of like favorite moment and worst moment. Lucia, do you have any options for those two?
Oh, shoot. Well, I'll start with my least favorite moment just because that popped into my head. I've never liked potty humor. So the part where he drinks the stool sample is too much for me. And it takes so long and they warn him and like he's still, I couldn't, it was too much.
It gags me every time I see that.
It's a gagging gag. Nice.
As for favorite, can you come back to me? I don't know off the top of my head.
How about you, Dave? Favorite worst moment?
When it ended, that was good.
Sure.
The end credits. No, I don't know. I mean, you brought up a lot of the stuff. I mean, some of the interplay, the president. Oh my God. Shawshank.
Oh, Tim Robbins.
Yeah, Tim Robbins. Yeah.
Tim Robbins as the president's great.
I like all the I know some people hate that. I love cameos when they're done well.
That's the thing. Him, even Rob Lowe cameo. Rob Lowe's great. And Seth Green's great as the sulky, embittered teen and all his side sarcasm and really emphasize how stupid Dr. Evil is. The hate is, I don't know if it's the PC or the age, but what I hate the most about the entire movie is that I've become too sensitive to how egregious the intent of the humor is. I mean, even Mini-Me, when Mini-Me came out, I was like, oh yeah, Mini-Me is this movie. And then I'm like, no, like you can't run with this. It's, I get that it's a clone, but there's a subhuman expression of what, let's say, dwarf. I don't even know what the PC term anymore is. And Vern Troyer is like this intelligent actor, which we learn after, but he's plays this disgusting freak. And I think what was the hardest reflection is that I used to think that shit was hilarious. I mean, that was a big, that was a t-shirt thing, right? Same with Fat Bastard and the poo jokes. And I don't know.
Different time.
Yeah, it was a different time.
How about you, Lucy? Could you think of a favorite moment?
This might be a favorite moment, but I really liked the opening and how we learned that Vanessa is actually a fembot. Yeah. I thought that was pretty funny.
I'll be the first one to admit, I think that the opening bits of each three of the Austin Powers movies are kind of their best features, which is like the dancing through the streets, or in this one, like him naked dancing through the thing with all the different titles that are popping up. By the way, I don't know if you noticed, but there is actually a sign that says Casino Royale in that opening bit in this movie, which I think is fun.
As a reference to the
before they
David
actually made
Nichols.
it. And then
they
made a comedy one back in the day. So for me, honestly, I know this is so juvenile. I love the run-on joke that happens near the end where they're basically just doing euphemisms for penis, and they cut to like the different sections. It's like, I just love that. And they brought that back for the third movie too. But I actually argue too that most of the things that people remember with Austin Powers happen in this movie and not the first one. Most of them actually come from the sequel, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm. That run-on joke thing, it tested so well with their test audiences that they included a second
that's
scene.
Why it came out in the conclusion again.
Yeah.
Yes.
The worst moment probably for me, and this is probably what they won the best makeup Oscar for, is literally the fat bastard scene where he's like covered in chicken grease. Like, I can't do it. It's just, I can't
fat
do it.
bastard scene.
Okay, so this is an article I brought up here, just talking about the influence on James Bond, because Daniel Craig is quoted as saying this. This is from TheRinger.com, written by Miles Surrey. So they're talking about kind of the impact that Austin Powers has had, it being like over 20 years now since the first one came out. And he says, excuse me for my language, mother, but he says, I am a huge Mike Myers fan, so don't get me wrong, but he kind of fucked us. That is his direct quote that Daniel Craig said. And so it goes on and talks about what was going on at the time, right? So we have Pierce Brosnan in that role. There would even be a James Bond movie that came out this year before his last one came out a few years later. And it was definitely going back into a kind of a Roger Moore type of tone again, a little bit more campy. And when this Austin Powers came out and really showed like the winky nature of it all, people kind of noticed that. And there was kind of this almost a backlash. Wow. There's this quote here from the article I'm just going to read. With the exception of the franchise's frequent use of time travel, the framework of Austin Powers and its quirky cast of characters all come straight from Bond. The list of references is so comprehensive, it requires a glossary. It's also satire that doesn't need to change things too much because the Bond franchise was already pretty ridiculous to begin with. It's hard to come up with a name more absurd than Pussy Galore. The winking humor of James Bond, particularly during the Roger Moore era, was seen as a feature rather than a bug, though leaning into the camp at times deflated the on-screen product. And so basically two things happen here. I don't know if this, like, so we have Austin Powers showing how ridiculous things are. And then 2 years later, Jason Bourne films start to come out and actually outgross the James Bond film. And so the producers, the Broccolis, who are the people who make the James Bond movies, basically said, no, hard reboot, we need to have a more gritty Bond. And so Daniel Craig is mentioning, like, he signed up to be the weird, ridiculous James Bond and didn't get to do it. Like, that's what he was trying to sign up for. And you can kind of see that if you see other roles that he does, like Benoit Blanc in Knives Out, or his role in Logan Lucky, where he gets to be a little absurd and weird and funny. He's never been able to do with James Bond. So there's definitely, I don't know what you feel about that. Do you think it was a better move in the James Bond universe to go gritty, or would you have preferred it to stay a bit campy?
I think culturally it needed to go gritty. The Pierce, I know there are people who like them. I find the Pierce Brosnan Bonds terrible. They're not fun to watch, and it feels like that's what they're trying to be, but they're not. They're just cheesy.
I agree. I because I've seen literally every James Bond movie, I have weird opinions of this whole thing. I'm a fan of the original Sean Connery ones, as dated as they are, as too, like sexual politics and stuff like that. But there's a certain charm to them. Except out of one or two, I'm pretty dismissive of the whole Roger Moore ones. I'm the weirdo who actually really loves Timothy Dalton.
Don't say it.
I love the Timothy Dalton ones because it's basically it's public record, and I don't care because it's them trying to do Daniel Craig before Daniel Craig. And no one liked it.
I haven't seen those
People
yet.
didn't like it in the 80s, and so they had to revert back to the campiness, and they did it again in the 2000s.
In Living Daylights, okay, but I think my pause with Timothy Dalton is I just didn't like how he looked.
That's fair. I mean, there's a certain look that you have to.
He's aged better. He looks more like kind of wolfish now, but when he made that movie, there was just something that I couldn't identify as his debut. And maybe it's because I'm a child during the Roger Moore era, and that full camp and comedy. But you can't.
It's also the one of the few where they really played with him having a relationship outside of his spy game. So I always appreciate for that, where he's not trying to have relationships with every woman. He's like actually a committed relationship.
I don't like this revisionist stuff where people will blame, like we talked about in The Matrix a little bit, and Austin Powers didn't kill Bond.
I killed Bond.
And I don't think it was born. This is an awful way to put it, but 9/11 changed Bond. Once I used the word zeitgeist earlier, 9/11 changed everything about North American culture. And so this fear, like 99, we talked about, there's a lot of hidden angst and already a lot of tension in this year, but it was more geared towards Y2K and sort of the end of sort of the golden era of just live and let live, to quote a Bond sort of ism. But after 9/11, and we saw that there was actual fragility in all of it. I think this is the other thing I've been talking about, comedies and everything. I think slowly it's eroded our ability to just sit back and enjoy a moment. Everything now has to have some kind of cultural moral so that we can ensure the children of tomorrow understand how the real world is, etc. And I don't know, it's fucking annoying.
I think that has something to do with it, but I think it's maybe all of the above more than like it's only this one thing. It probably had yes, people's tastes over time change as the younger generations kind of rise up through the ranks. There's going to be those battles that they picked with the previous, generation before them. I think it was just coming to a time like the world is changing, technology is changing, relationships and like how we view other races, genders, all that stuff is changing, and so working back in this like 60s mentality just isn't working for us anymore. Yes, 9/11 had this big reality dump on us, and then I think with Jason Bourne and all this other stuff being like, oh, we can be gritty and it can actually look good on film nowadays. I think that was just all of it at once kind of pushed it. And you had someone who could legitimately be a badass in Daniel Craig. 1,000%, none of the previous Bonds, none of them would have been able to pull off what Daniel Craig was able to do.
Well, first generation Sean Connery, like in maybe in the first movie when he was still angry Scotsman, but it's a great point. Having unfortunately watched both Austin Powers, is that the advances even in 2 years in cinematography, staging, prop design do make the second one already infinitely more watchable than the first, even though it's only 2 years apart. And as we've discussed culturally, at least 99, some of the European and British productions versus the Hollywood blockbuster sort of staging, as that changes, what we consider to be watchable has evolved quite a bit too, and what you can even put and display as a beautiful action sequence. I mean, I find the Fast and Furious and the Mission Impossible have taken over Bond. I would much rather watch Tom Cruise jump out of a plane or The Rock holding onto a helicopter with his bare hands. I mean, it's so fucking stupid, but that's like, I love it, right? And as much as I love Daniel Craig's Bond movies, he looks like it's great you brought that up. He looks miserable. And I know he's been on record. He hates it. But
yeah, he does. I mean, that's the thing. At some point, not right now, it'll take too long, but I'll tell you my theory of what the difference between stupid and dumb is, and why I like stupid movies but not dumb movies. But anyways, there's a fine line that I like to put in. But the semantics I put in there. See, if you were called up today and being like, you need to be an advisor on this mysterious Austin Powers 4 movie that's going to be made, what advice would you give to them, do you think?
I would say don't bring back Fat Bastard at all. Don't punch down in your jokes, because there's so much of that.
It is. It's
and
weird.
It just doesn't really hold up. I don't know. I don't think they can make another one. I know that they've been talking about it for years. It would have to be so drastically different. I don't think
that's what I'm thinking. Like, if they came out and made this type of film again, it's like, I don't see how it plays, because what they're parodying and satirizing doesn't exist anymore. So like, what are they going to do? Like, I could see what I would say what they could do is literally make a satire parody of the ultra serious Bond, and like, what does that look like in the Austin Powers universe? That would actually be kind of an interesting take on the whole thing.
I think just looking, and I have this nostalgia, of course, for the early 90s golden era of Saturday Night Live cast members. But when Adam Sandler was descending into madness just before the Netflix renaissance, I mean, he looked like he was going to kill himself. Like if you looked at it, and even in his films, he looked fucking just depressed, miserable, funny. I mean, I know it's Judd Apatow, so he's just a miserable director in the first place. But, you know, by the time he's doing funny people, like that is a depressing movie, even though the stand-up and some of the emerging talent are hilarious in it. My God, that movie is an hour too long, and it just, you leave and you just, I don't know. But when he came back to Netflix, and like, I loved The Do-Over, and I was convinced to watch the one with my favorite comedian of all time, Andy Samberg, greatest comedic mind of the next generation, genius.
Hot Rod is good. I like Hot Rod.
Hot Rod. I mean, speaking of like commercially successful, I mean, that movie didn't even get any airplay, but that movie is genius for people that like the stupid humor, right? Stupid's good, dumb's bad. Okay.
Stupid's good, dumb's bad.
So all of this to preface that if Mike Myers comes back, and it looks like if he ever did, he'd probably talk to his buddy Adam and get $100 million at Netflix, that he should target the old audience and just make the same stupid film again with tweaks in the sense that they'll have to be more PC in general. I think that that's where they have to live. A, because how could you even have Austin Powers like modern, like you said? But B, I think for these comedians to actually enjoy it, I mean, they didn't age. They're stuck in comedy writing from the early 90s. It's hard to.
So I consider myself the audience for those movies because I did love them and I was at a good age to watch them. So if they come out and do the same thing now, I don't want to see that. So don't you feel like their audience has evolved and therefore they should too?
I don't know. I mean, what was the user rating on Rotten Tomatoes? Like 77%. People still like it.
71.
And I know that's the internet and the type of person that wants to log in and either anonymously or name themselves, you know, there's biases built into online polling. I'm not giving this movie 77%. I think it's fucking awful. So you're right in the sense that I'm not 22 anymore, or 19 when the first one came out or whatever it was. So I've changed for sure. But the people that would still enjoy the renaissance of this character, that still buy into whatever the humor was meant to be, are going to be expecting the similar tone. So, you know, maybe it's not as egregious as creating a character just to make fun of a specific demographic. Maybe they bring back Fat Bastard and he's like, right? Super fit. Like, I don't know, whatever the gag twist might be, but the humor will have to remain the same tone. Otherwise, it's not Austin Powers anymore. It's just a new movie.
We're running a bit long, but the last thing here is, do we think that this is even culturally relevant anymore? Or is Austin Powers still something do you think people are looking back fondly on, or is it just a relic that we know it because we grew up with it?
It certainly was culturally relevant. You can't deny that, obviously. I also think that the people who knew it and who were around then still remember it. Like, there are things that I watched around that time that I literally don't recall. So I do feel like the people who watched it back when it was new still remember it, because there are things that I don't remember from that time. But no, I can't say that it's culturally relevant now. It was even a joke. I don't know if you ever watched the show Happy Endings.
No.
It's a pretty good show.
It's a handful of years old now.
It's on Amazon Prime.
In their Halloween episode. Oh, is it on Amazon Prime?
The Amazon Prime is going to pay us money for that plug. So it is on Amazon Prime. Yeah, all seasons of Happy Endings.
Yeah, I'd recommend it. It's really good. And so in one of their Halloween episodes, one of the characters dresses up as Austin Powers, but it's a joke that it's so outdated.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that, I guess to come at this from a different angle, I don't think the movie might be like, the viewing of the movie might not be culturally relevant anymore, but like certain phrases and things are still relevant. Like memes are still shared about Austin Powers in 2020. So there's some sort of like, I don't know, permeation that this still has past the movie. And maybe that's what it is. It's the movie itself isn't anymore, but it's, I don't know, Power still has some sort of...
There are memes with manatees in it. Like, I don't know. I mean, the power of a meme, like I would wonder if the meme exists only for us to share with each other and not a 19-year-old kid who's going to, or a 15-year-old kid who even understands what the image is of anymore.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of another... people are not sharing Oh gosh, I'm
8mm.
Jurassic.
Actually, no. Nick Cage is all over the internet.
Yeah, Nick Cage is all over the internet. But the British movie that we watched, like that,
Still crazy.
Still crazy. Like people are not sharing Still Crazy.
They might in the
memes around to other
UK.
people.
That movie's
Maybe
so
they are.
well reviewed. It's unbelievable because it was awful.
We're done here.
The machine has told us we have to stop, so we have to wrap this
So
up.
bossy.
Now, I always feel bad when we have a guest, Lucia, because we have to first go into our ratings for this movie, which you can find on our Letterboxd profile, so letterboxd.com/KDVSTM, which is also that is our social media handle here as well, is KDVSTM. But if you were to rate this movie out of 5, what do you think you would give it, even though your rating technically doesn't matter?
Ooh, here we go. You're committing. This is on record.
Well, actually, I use Letterboxd, so I did rate it. And this is so embarrassing. When I went to log it this time, it'll show you whatever rating you had before.
Right.
So my previous rating was a 4.5
Whoa.
out of 5.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I brought that down, I think it was to a 3.
Mm-hmm.
I still like it.
Yeah.
I still think it's fun, and I think it has problems, and I would love to remove certain parts of it, but overall, I still will enjoy watching it.
I'm right there with you. I also would give it a 3. And I mean, I give 3s a lot to movies that I feel are pretty mediocre, because it's like I don't hate it enough to be like, I hate this movie to such a degree, and I don't love the movie to like such a degree to like make it higher. It's like it's in the middle. It's a technically forgettable movie, but there might be some elements that I like. Dave, what are you going to rate this?
I like that you just justified giving a middle score to middling movies. That's a great description of what a 3 is. I give it a 2 just because I liked part of it, because this movie should be a 0. But there are parts, you're right. There are parts that are still funny. There's still side characters that the gags work. The penis thing's hilarious. And the rest of the movie can go rotten hell.
All right. Well, that means then that with your 2 and my 3, that averages 2.5, which is what we're going to be rating this movie on Letterboxd. And so entering our list at number 14 is Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me. Lucy, you've been such a great guest, but could you maybe tell people about your podcast?
Oh, thank you. So me and my cousin Janet host a podcast called Repodcasting, where we pick movies that we think have some kind of miscast role in it, and we recast it.
I really like it. I like playing along. Actually, you were great to have on because you recently did a James Bond episode. And I was so glad that you brought up, I'm going to totally blank on his name, the gentleman from Crazy Rich Asians. Henry.
That was Janet's pick. Yeah, I don't remember his name.
I was so aligned with her on that pick. I'm like, I kind of hope they do. They won't, but it would be great if that's who they picked as James Bond. And I was like, I think about this all the time, way too much. Like, who would I pick as James Bond? But if people wanted to stay in contact with you or find you online, what are some of your social media handles?
We are Repodcasting on all the social media things. So nice and easy. Find
Excellent. So let me just push this button. Let's see what we're going to be reviewing next week, Dave. Oh, great. We get to go watch The Iron Giant.
All right. Better than...
It's been a while since I've seen that movie.
I'm not actually sure if I know of it, and we'll see if I've actually seen it.
I do like it quite a bit. Lucy, have you ever seen The Iron Giant?
I haven't. That's a gap in my movie viewing history.
It's good. A non-Disney cartoon, and I think it's one of the best ones. So I'm excited to see it. Well, Dave, maybe you should just unplug this lamp. The machine seems to be a little bit too groovy right now for my taste.
You'll notice, Kyle, that it is not plugged in. This lava lamp is self-perpetuating. It will never die, much unfortunately like this movie.
Why did the robot's eyes go red then? It's like it's high.
Well, you made it. You have to use the user manual that you clearly created. There's a giant book at its feet. We'll have to...
Let me get this book.